Hey guys, so this is the first of a new segment that I'm trying out on my channel called Fallen Franchises, which is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. I go over famous franchises that once rode the highest highs only to fall to the lowest lows. Be it a single botched ending or a slow decline over many years or installments, these are the movies and TV shows that we once loved to bits that ended up breaking our hearts for one reason or another. And seeing how this year marks the 13th anniversary, counted 13th, god I feel old, of the once critically acclaimed vampire series True Blood, I figured that was as good a place as any to start. Based on the Charlaine Harris novel series titled The Southern Vampire Mysteries, True Blood takes place in an alternate present day where vampires have publicly declared their existence to the world thanks to the creation of a synthetic blood substitute known appropriately as True Blood. Some vampires are on board with the whole coming out of the coffin thing, as they call it, others less so. In the midst of all this, though, in the fictional American town of Bon Tom, a psychic waitress named Sookie Stackhouse meets and falls in love with vampire Bill Compton. Essentially, the show is Supernatural plus Dallas plus an R rating. A whole colourful cast of characters gets involved, such as Sookie's quick-talking best friend Tara, Tara's cousin Lafayette, Sookie's himbo brother Jason, along with a ton more, all in the midst of a ton of sex, blood, and, well, more sex. Seriously, this show broke quite a few milestones when it came to raunchy stuff in TV, cause yeah, it gets pretty up there. Now, I can't talk about where True Blood went wrong and fell from grace without first going over how it rose to the highest of highs that it began with. And to do that, we have to go right back to the beginning. Series creator Alan Ball, who had previously worked for HBO making 6 Feet Under, first considered doing True Blood after discovering the Southern Vampire Mysteries books whilst browsing a Barnes & Noble store before a dental appointment. Meeting with Charlaine Harris in person, the two agreed that Ball was the ideal pick to bring Harris's books to the small screen. The show ran for about 7 seasons from 2008 to 2014, with initial reactions being mixed to positive, peaking around season 3, then leveling out around seasons 4 and 5, and then falling completely down the drain after Ball left the show in season 6. I can't quite remember how I personally got into the show, and God knows I was way too young when I started watching it. Between this and Torchwood, I'm starting to see a pattern in 12-year-old Posh pricks' viewing habits, but I remember being an avid fan when True Blood kicked off, as was the rest of the world for that matter. People forget now, but there was a time when True Blood dominated popular media discussions. I mean, it was coming out around the time of the whole Twilight vampire werewolf romance phase, except with a far more adult spin. And it also served as a really good example of gay representation, or at least good for the time. There are some elements of the whole LGBTQ side of things that the show tries to represent that may not have aged so well. But that's a discussion for another day. All in all, those first 3 seasons were pretty goddamn solid, and much of the reason for that was the show's frankly excellent cast of characters. Sookie Stackhouse, played brilliantly by the amazing Anna Paquin, is a great protagonist. She does a great job of pulling off that innocent young girl routine, whilst at the same time demonstrating some serious independence and self-assurance. In season 1, she is meek and not the most world-weary, sure, but she's still tough, she's still intelligent, she's still not the kind of person to take anyone's shit lying down, which serves as a great dynamic to share with her romantic partner and lead and actual IRL husband, Bill Compton. Bill and Sookie's relationship really takes center stage throughout the show, and a lot of the time it feels like a response to and rebuttal to the undeniably toxic relationship presented in the Twilight series with Edward and Bella. Bill frequently underestimates Sookie, and she's very quick to prove his assumptions wrong. Sookie often demonstrates a lack of experience in the world of vampires and supernatural junk, and Bill is able to educate her. They have good banter, great chemistry, and you really feel the love and bond between the two. That being said, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. In fact, a lot of the show's twists and turns deal with the undeniably toxic behavior of a man who is, for all intents and purposes, an ageless murderer. Bill is still a killer. While he is a gentleman at heart throughout most of the show, he's still killed people, a lot of the time in his early days more for kicks than survival. As a result, his sense of humanity is undeniably warped and misshapen thanks to these experiences, so he's naturally going to exude some very toxic, not okay behaviors when it comes to his romantic relations, whether he intends it or not. But unlike Twilight, where the toxic behavior is idolized or just not addressed at all, True Blood takes great steps to demonstrate the flaws in Sookie and Bill's relationship. Not necessarily because he's a vampire, but because he is kind of a lying manipulator who doesn't take much issue killing people if he feels it's for a good enough reason. This is something Sookie has to deal with over the course of the show, not just with Bill, but with a lot of characters around her, and I love seeing that kind of character growth over the course of those first 3 to 4 seasons. But Bill and Sookie aren't the only memorable characters. I'm not kidding when I say that True Blood has one of the best casts I think I've seen in any show ever. Jason, Sookie's brother, is practically himbo energy personified. He's an absolute stud and the object of desire for every woman in Bontom, but he's also got a surprising amount of heart and soul. I like that he's not a big dummy, or at least not just a big dummy. Some of the show's most emotional and gut-wrenching plot lines involve him. I particularly like his arc in seasons 2 through 3. Long story short, he ends up killing a person and has to learn how to live with himself for doing that. While he likes to put on this big macho persona for the people around him, deep down, Jason's not a bad guy. He's not some cold-blooded murderer, really he's just a big kid with a sincere heart and a serious amount of sensitivity. That's just so sweet. And then there's Tara, who is easily one of the best characters ever conceived of by human minds. I mean, she's snarky, she's sassy, she comes down on fools like an articulate sack of bricks. She's got her fair share of damage too, she's a great friend to Sookie, and she's got some of the best lines of anyone on the show.
You've been taking night classes?
School is just for white people looking for other white people to read to them. I figure I save my money and read to myself.
What you mean if you get lucky? Your standards are so low, you always get lucky.
Low self-esteem, childhood trauma, blah, blah, snore. What's your excuse?
Oh god, Rutina Wesley, marry me, please. You are a treasure and we do not deserve to have you. Then there's Tara's cousin Lafayette, the close second best character on the show. Let me be clear, there's badass, there's legendary, then there's Lafayette. He's eccentric, he's out there, he's got some amazing sassy energy whilst managing to keep a really chill vibe about himself, not to mention he is gay as all hell, does not care who knows it, and apologizes for none of it. This guy could read RuPaul's ass under the table without putting a foot wrong and come out smelling like a rose.
Excuse you, it says ladies on that door.
So what you skank hoes doing in here?
Secret sauce? Who you fucking kidding? Since when is it right to call mayonnaise a fucking secret?
These fuckers' palates are as backwoods as their brains.
I'm a survivor first, a capitalist second, and a whole bunch of other shit after that, but a hooker dead last. So if I got even a Jew at an Al-Qaeda pep rally shot at getting my black ass up out this motherfucker, I'm taking it.
Watch yourself, bitch.
I am. And ours is gorgeous.
And those are just two of my favorites. The whole show is peppered with fun, interesting, damaged, entertaining characters from top to bottom. Even the supporting characters end up getting some real shine as the time goes on. Eric and Pam are one of my favorite pairings, and I love seeing their relationship deepen throughout the show. Jessica went from annoying baby vampire to Bill's beloved surrogate daughter pretty damn quickly. Lorena and Russell Edgington are two of my favorite villains in any piece of media ever, both for wildly different reasons. Hell, even one-off characters like Godric and Mary Ann stuck with me. In short, the show's greatest strength was its characters, and for the first 4 seasons, the writers played to those characters beautifully. On top of that, I loved seeing the development of this alternate modern-day Earth. It does something all good stories do. Take a simple concept, this one being what if vampires existed and tried to integrate into mainstream society, stretch it out into a whole story, and just let the possibilities run wild. The show explores some great concepts surrounding its central premise. What would happen to our society if we found out one day that vampires both exist and want to be a part of everyday, or every night, civilization? Would we be welcoming and understanding, or bigoted, malicious, prejudicial arseholes? Spoiler alert, it's the second one. What would happen if, say, vampire blood had the same effects on humans as an incredibly potent and addictive drug? What would vampire politics look like, and how would said politics affect the human side of things? How would organizations like the IRS react to a race of people who have spent hundreds of years accumulating wealth and only shelling out so much of it for the sake of taxes? Hell, what would the sexual lives of such a race of people be like, given how they've got hundreds of years worth of experience under their belts? I love shows and movies that explore those kind of simple, subtle, clever little concepts. And in the case of True Blood, they didn't feel the need to explain away all of those concepts, at least for the first few seasons. They never go over how the vampires work the way that they do necessarily, or why silver hurts them or anything like that. The magical elements are magical. It just is the way it is, as demonstrated quite poignantly by Bill in this speech that he gives to Sookie in the very first season.
You think that it's not magic that keeps you alive? Just because you understand the mechanics of how something works doesn't make it any less of a miracle. We're all kept alive by magic, Sookie. My magic's just a little different from yours, that's all.
As a result of this, the showrunners were able to introduce some pretty wild supernatural elements, and it somehow didn't feel out of place. Hell, the second season introduces a Maenad, aka one of the handmaidens of the Greek god Dionysus, as its primary antagonist. How do you manage to get that in a show about vampires? And yet, as weird as it worked. The show was at its best when it didn't feel the need to explain a damn thing and just took you along for the ride. A few questions answered here and there is fine, as long as the focus remained on the characters, their journey, their struggle, and their relationships. As long as the show did that, everything worked out fine. So where did it all go wrong? As I've teased several times now, the show's decline began around about its fourth season. Some signs were a little more obvious than others, a few bits of faulty writing here, a mild jumping the shark moment there, but fundamentally the biggest failing of True Blood's later seasons was that it stopped being about the characters and became more about the overarching supernatural plots. And as I've mentioned, that's not where the show's strengths lay. True Blood was at its best when it focused on the mind-reading waitress from a hick town in the deep south who gets mixed up in some local vampire shenanigans. The show's smallness was its strength. We weren't invested in the world of True Blood because of the global implications of vampires integrating into society. We were more invested in it because of the implications that it was having on this one town and the people therein who we care about. In fact, I can pinpoint the exact moment True Blood died. Season 3, episode 10. Literally the first words spoken.
I'm a fairy? How fucking lame.
Right there is when the show started to go completely downhill. Why? It's not because the show introduced fairies as a supernatural element. As I said, True Blood went weirder a lot earlier with the likes of Marianne. More than that, the show started to rejig itself to be more about the larger supernatural plot instead of the smaller, more personable stories. We didn't need to know what Sookie was to be invested in her, but once the cat's out of the bag, her fairiness arguably becomes her single defining character trait. She's not an interesting, reliable character for us to follow, she's just a plot point, and that attitude ended up extending to every other element of the show. Keeping the stakes relegated to something simple like there's a murderer on the loose and he's going around town killing girls who sleep with vampires allows the writing to stay focused on the characters and their journey, trying to raise the stakes with plots like this secret society of fairies are kidnapping human fairy hybrids, or the central vampire government has gotten taken over by religious zealots who want to resurrect their vampire goddess and take over the world. It just ends up distracting from what made the show great to begin with. This is a depressingly common trap a lot of shows and movies fall into, a specific kind of shark jumping that involves upping the ante again and again to the point that the show just doesn't feel engaging anymore. I like to call it the Pokemon effect, because I'm a pretentious dick like that. In the anime series Pokemon, Ash keeps stumbling into situations involving Pokemon of increasingly more legendary status and power and relevance. We start with this being the most legendary Pokemon ever, then the show goes, no, this is the most legendary Pokemon ever. No, this is, no this is, no this, no this, no this, until Ash is interacting with literal Pokemon God. This is the same general thing that True Blood ended up doing, where the showrunners fooled themselves into thinking that bigger was better, that by upping the ante and making the threats and situations larger, that would keep the audience coming back. Just take Jason as a good example. For the first 3 seasons, Jason's character trajectory was clear and focused. He had a chip on his shoulder about vampires, he doesn't like feeling as though his sexual prowess doesn't match up to theirs, so in season 2 he ends up joining a bigoted, vampire-hating church which validates his toxic masculine tendencies with guns, training courses, and all that fun army stuff. However, he ends up having to question his prejudice when said church kidnaps his sister and almost kills her, along with a whole den of vampires by using his own friend as a suicide bomber. This comes to a head when he ends up shooting a man, Tara's lover no less, to save Detective Andy Belfleur and suffers severe PTSD as a result. This whole character arc is a great dissection of Jason's insecurities, his assumptions and preconceptions about his self-worth and his manhood. And it's a great example of a piece of media talking about toxic masculinity in a really meaningful and mindful and non-condescending way. Jason can be a thoughtless arsehole at times, particularly early on, but he doesn't stay that way. His ultimate character arc is about growing up, growing past his insecurities, past his need to prove himself as a man, and realize who he truly is inside. Not some gun-touting macho tough guy, but a sensitive, brave, and strong soul capable of great caring and emotional depth. All of this gets completely chucked out of the window as the seasons progress. By the time we get to season 5, Jason has reverted right back to his vampire-hating, gun-toting, macho man-child ways, shooting up vampires and spitting on their corpses just out of spite. This same kind of backwards development goes for every one of the characters. Suki gets over her love for Bill and Eric because they're both manipulative dicks, and then does the whole thing again with another vampire pretty boy 2 seasons later. Bill spends much of his time in the early seasons getting past his younger, more bloodthirsty self, only to steer headlong into rabid, raving vampire zealots in seasons 5 and 6. That's not even counting the truly out-of-nowhere directions the show takes some of the characters. Season 4 ends with Tara getting shot and killed, saving Suki's life. Okay, that's kind of shitty that one of my favourite characters is dead, but it's a shocking death and a really good twist to end a season on. But then, what happens in Season 5? Pam shows up and turns her into a vampire, something which makes absolutely no sense character-wise for either Pam or Tara, considering that the two hate each other. Tara's whole thing is that she hates vampires, and it undoes a perfectly good tragic ending for one of your better characters. Then, just to add insult to injury, when Tara does end up dying for real, it's off-screen in the first episode of the final season. If that's not the biggest middle finger to one of the best characters in TV history, I don't know what is. Giving as much credit to Alan Ball and the rest of the screenwriters as I can, a show like True Blood doesn't really offer much material for an ongoing series. After about 7 seasons, you've pretty much squeezed all you can out of the characters and the world you've created. You can't tap this well anymore past that point without it feeling like you're just beating a dead horse. And as I mentioned earlier, you can't expand this world too much without losing sight of what made the whole thing work to begin with. Ideally, True Blood should have gotten a bittersweet ending around season 5. Maybe Suki moves on from Bill and Eric and grieves her lost loved ones in peace and solitude in her grand's house. Maybe Jason finally grows up a bit and settles down with Jessica in a nice vampire-human relationship. Maybe Bill and Eric become partners of some variety. Maybe they leave Bon Tom to get away from the memory of Suki. Hell, maybe Tara doesn't die. Maybe Tara and Suki end up leaving Bon Tom together instead of either of them staying in the place that has caused them so much trauma. I'm not going to pretend like it's it's the easiest show to wrap up, at least with a completely satisfying ending, but 5 seasons I think was enough for what they had to work with. Ideally, the showrunners should have just wrapped up the character arcs that they could, killed off a couple of others, and given the show a dignified exit instead of keeping it going past the point of irrelevance. Hell, I could even see a spin-off or two set in this world with different characters if they hadn't butchered the ending so thoroughly, but after this many years, I'm pretty sure that ship has sailed. At a point, it became clear that the showrunners just didn't have any particular plan or concept of where they wanted to take the show, or indeed how they wanted it to end. They were just playing it by ear, which I do get, I do understand. I don't think there's a single show out there that didn't go through considerable story changes throughout production, and I doubt there's any show out there where the final episode ended exactly how they planned when they started out in the very first episode. Okay, maybe one, but that's a video for another day. All the same, I still argue that you need a good idea of where you're going if you want your show to have a satisfying conclusion. You can't just keep going blind season to season without having any plan and hope things will just magically fall into place. That was the trap that True Blood fell into, and in fairness, it is a pretty common one, planning for the short term instead of the long term, thinking about next season's plot and not where the overall show is headed. By the time we got to the final season, the show just felt completely detached from where it began, and the writers seemed utterly lost and out of ideas, at least ones that made sense. If I were to give True Blood a rating to demonstrate just how far it fell from grace, I would give it a -6 out of -10. Seasons 1 through 4 were still pretty entertaining, even with the downward trajectory the show makes. It's not one of those shows where the ending is so awful that it ruins your appreciation for the whole thing. Just be warned that if you are going to keep watching past season 4, the cracks are going to become real visible real quick. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.